really understood the concept and consequences of single spine arrangement.
They had a full year.
Well, my father used to have a saying about incompetence. He said, if you gave a monkey sufficient paper and sufficient time, it could type a book.
How much would be sufficient time?
Well, it depends on whether the monkey is smart or not smart.
Exactly.
But the point is this, that you can give somebody a year, and if they are competent and sharp and on the spot, they can sail through.
Deliver.
You can give somebody 10 years,
It won't
it
happen.
won't make a difference. The whole scheme of labor and wages and salary arrangements, I think that were not handled with truthfulness and in a lot of cases contemptuously. You have senior officials of this government passing condescending and derogative comments about nurses and teachers and calling some doctors as charlatans.
Murderers at some stage.
And then you want them to sit at a table with you? Treat them decently. I believe that even if the situation is extremely difficult and you're truthful and you show good faith, people will walk that difficult journey with you.
Is that the case of single-digit inflation?
Look, as an economist and a banker, sometimes I marvel at what people make of single-digit inflation. In economics, economic theory teaches us that zero inflation is dangerous. Yes. So if the idea is that there shouldn't be any inflation, then let's fight for zero inflation. What does single-digit inflation mean, and what does it do for you? Inflation is a cost to society in many ways, in terms of the value of your assets, including your store of value, which is your money, in terms of your production, your variable cost in production, and a host of others. So the idea is to bring down inflation sufficiently to have consequences in the other macroeconomic areas of importance. What do I mean by this? If you sufficiently bring down inflation, you can bring down the cost of borrowing, your interest rates, so that businesses can find credit much cheaper.
Yes.
You can bring down, if you bring down the cost of inflation, you stabilize the planning horizons of businesses so that they can, instead of doing short-term planning, they can do medium-term to long-term planning.
Yes.
If, for instance, a businessman or producer knows that the average rate of inflation is 9% and it can be sustained for the next 5 years, they have a long-term planning horizon of stability with which to plan. It increases production, it increases efficiency. More importantly, it can increase employment.
Because you can install new plant.
Yes. Cost of borrowing has come down. You can refurbish your plant. You can install new plants. But if you achieve single-digit inflation and the consequences are not felt, that is, your cost of borrowing is still high.
Very.
You are not generating sufficient employment to absorb new labor and market entrants. Your installed capacity, productive capacity or utilization rates are not moving up to installed capacity.
Churches are renting the factories.
You are chasing a phantom. That single-digit inflation becomes a farce. And I always refer to what Professor Mills said when he was candidate Mills. That inflation, low-digit inflation, warrior. That was the question he posed. Yeah. The warrior. Yes. Warrior. So, warrior, it means the consequences of low inflation is what we ought to be looking for. Look through the macroeconomic data of this country, and you don't feel the impact of single-digit inflation. Capacity utilization is diminishing. unemployment is on the increase, cost of borrowing is rigid downwards. And these are three major indicators of the usefulness of fighting for single digit. So if you don't see it, then sort of we are wasting a lot of time and space in chasing that phantom. Why is it that we find this anomaly of a single digit inflation without the consequences of, or the benefits of single digit?
Yeah.
Two reasons, two major reasons. One is that you are not factoring in the risk element of your pricing system. Look, there is such a high perception of risk in our society. If you look at bank balance sheets, look at their uncollected items, non-performing assets, huge. Yes. So the banks are saying that because there's such a huge credit risk and a credit risk overhang, we cannot follow the prime indicator of single-digit inflation. Look at the unemployment figures. In spite of the boast that we created 1.6 million new jobs, this is the first time in our national history where unemployed graduates have formed an association of unemployed graduates. Look at our production levels. Apart from the mines and apart from cocoa, you don't see any appreciable growth in any of the subsectors of our economy. The other thing that could be happening is, one, the integrity of the index itself. You see, when I talk about integrity, it could be manufacturing data. It could be that the basket upon which the index is calculated is outmoded. Yes. And doesn't reflect the underlying economic trends and dynamics. That's right. Right? Yeah. Or it could simply be that the headline inflation does not reflect the basket. Let me explain. There are over 130 items in the basket of goods that is used in calculating inflation. And I looked at one interesting situation for 2009 to 2010, where a major component in the index, such as fats and oils, had declined by almost 70%. That is going to drag down the average rate of inflation. But you and I, when you go to the market, you are not going to buy fats and oils. Yeah. You are buying the grains, the legumes, the basic staples. That is where the inflation is really happening. So even if inflation goes up in the things that normal households buy, fats and oils is dragging the
headline
inflation down.
On the average.
But you see, I remember talking to a gentleman on the other side and explaining this to him. And I said, even if you gloat at the fact that fats and oils has declined, it portends danger. What is fats and oils? It's an intermediate good used in the manufacturing process. Soaps and such. Unilever and those who manufacture. If there is a decline, such a sharp decline in the demand, it tells you that unemployment is going to go up.
It means the manufacturers are importing finished goods.
Exactly. They are importing finished goods, or they are not increasing production. And because labor is a derived demand, if production goes down, I don't need so many workers.
Off they go.
Off they go. So that itself portends danger. We as a nation have to be careful in understanding what we want out of a single-digit inflation.
Now,
not the number
we are
by
being
itself.
told that borrowing successfully is an indicator of good governance.
Benjamin Franklin once said, neither a lender nor a borrower be. Neither a lender or a borrower be. If you are borrowing to invest and increase the store of your assets, it is not necessarily a bad thing. But if you are investing to chop, you are eating your eggs so you can hatch more chickens. That is essentially what it is. Go and look at our incremental capital output ratio, or what economists call ICO. And you realize that it's a lousy number. It's a lousy number because even though we are borrowing for investment purposes, it is not reflecting in the incremental status of our national assets.
Yes.
A lot of the inflows are going into the mining sector. Those are enclaves. First, the job impact is low, and it's an enclave economy that does not have much of a linkage and ripple effect with the rest of the economy. That is why when you go to mining towns, they're all in decay because there are no real linkages to the local economy. Oil. Hey, how many people are employed in the oil industry? It is when you develop the oil industry into the plastics, into the gas, into the fertilizer, and so on and so forth, that you begin to add up to employment. So that the real thing we have to ask ourselves, what are you borrowing for? You see, and because borrowing imposes a cost on a nation but spreads the benefit over time, we have to be careful. Look, when they were going to borrow $3 billion, I said to myself, why can't we spread the borrowing? The activities XTX, that was the XTX, it will take you about 20 years to complete the project.
So why borrow it all
So
up
why
front?
borrow it all at once, unless you suspect that your yield curve is going to change from a normal slope? That is, unless you suspect that you will be so credit unworthy that in the future you cannot borrow.
So you lock it down now.
So you lock it down
and
now.
take on the cost of keeping it locked
Yes. In financial analysis, it's called the Macaulay duration curve. It means that you suspect that the cost of reinvestment or the cost of sequential borrowing will be so high that you price you out of the market. So you lock down. But that, if you say you are credit worthy, it means that the Macaulay duration curve should be downward sloping.
Any time you can borrow.
Exactly. It means that, in fact, in the future, your cost of borrowing will be cheaper.
Yes, because
If that is the argument, that the more, because we are so credit worthy, you can borrow, then let us look at our Macaulay duration curve and decide that because we are so credit worthy, our future borrowings must not be done now, but done in the future T+, so that the cost of borrowing will significantly come down.